Hey there, Wargamers, and welcome back to another Wargames Delivered video. In this video, we're going to be practicing metallics on one of the Mountains Men from Game of Thrones. Let's get started. So to start this mini off, I primed it with the airbrush using a uniform gray and matte white zenithal highlight kind of prime, and then we're going to switch over to primarily metallics for 80% of this model. So he's basically just covered in armor. It's one of the Mountains Men. These guys are big, armored savages. So we're going to start with doing gunmetal, and we're actually just going to try to brush this on normally. And with that, whenever you're doing metallics and brushing them normally, you're going to want to thin them down a little bit more than you normally do. And just work in small, thin layers. Take your time, try to go even with each layer. And then obviously wait till the first layer dries before you move on to the next one. So we're going to cover pretty much everything except for the pouches, the face, the hair, and the undershirt here on the model. Now, when you're working on the chainmail, you'll want to make sure that you work pretty thorough and make sure you get a nice even coat into the deep recesses of the chainmail here, because this is pretty much the only color that the chainmail is going to get other than a wash, so you'll want to be very thorough with that. Now, we're going to be working with other metallics in this video, but we want to cover all of our metallic bits with this gunmetal color right now, just because it's the darkest metallic that we have, and it's going to give us a good base and foundation for the rest of the highlights that we're going to do. And obviously you can kind of pick out more details if you want in the model, and you know, add some more browns and blacks if you'd like to. But these guys, even in the books, are pretty plain. They don't wear the Clegane colors to kind of hide who they are and do dastardly deeds without revealing who they are. So that's kind of why I'm just giving them a very basic standard paint scheme here. They're basically just giant metal savages, so that's kind of the effect that I'm going for here. And the main areas that you're trying to avoid here with the metallic is the face, the hair. There's a couple parts on the model where his undercoat are showing, like on the back there, and really his pouches and his belt on the middle, the waist of the model. So this is going to be the largest step on the model. Just take your time with it, give it 2 to 3 nice even thin coats, and you'll have a very nice even metallic like here. Moving on to our next step, we're going to switch over to dark tone, and this is a wash here, and we're going to use this as a very heavy wash on the entirety of the model, except for the bits that we left as the base color. So all of the metallic bits that we just painted, we want to cover very heavily in this wash. As you can see, without drying on the chainmail even, it looks like it's adding depth and color there. Metallics take really well to washes. I always recommend washing your metallics and then building some highlights back up, just because it adds that level of realism. And if you're like me, non-metallic metals are almost impossible for you, so not impossible, just hard, and I haven't practiced much. So this is kind of my quicker and easier way to get some nice metallic looking minis on the field. Once you've given that about 45 minutes to an hour to dry, we're going to switch over to our first highlighting step, and we're going to switch to plate mail metal. And with this, we are going to switch over to a dry brushing technique. And we're going to switch to a very small kind of dry brush here. And we're going to pretty much cover the entirety of the metallic bits that we painted earlier. The sword here. The only thing that we're going to leave just shaded with the wash are going to be the chainmail parts. So really try to avoid dry brushing over the chainmail parts, although if you get a little bit on it, it's okay. Just really try to keep the shadows that we established on the model there. And everything else we're going to highlight with this color. So all the way up the arms, the chest plate, the greaves, everything else on the model. And sometimes when you're working on dry brushing smaller areas like this chest plate here, you might want to switch over to a smaller brush with a not so fine tip. That can kind of make this easier, although it's a little bit more time consuming, but it's a little bit safer and you can do a little bit more of a controlled dry brush. Now, since this is going to be our last metallic step on the model, we're going to show you guys what can happen if you use the same water before changing it when you're using metallics. So it's always good, I've mentioned this before in a couple of videos, but it's always good to reiterate. It's great to have 2 cups of water, one for metallics and one just for your normal acrylics and speed paints. The metallics can leave kind of flaky bits in your water, and you can transfer that over to other paints if you're not careful. So we'll switch over to that clip here shortly. And as you can see here, that's after using a heavy dry brush and washing that out in that water. So there's plenty of metallic bits in there, so we want to get that changed out or get a separate water container. And since we're going to be switching over to some speed paints, we're going to clean up with a little bit of Stone Golem. And with this paint, we're just going to use this and lightly cover up each area that we hit a little bit too much with the metallic paints. All of the areas that we don't want metallic, we're just going to hit this and cover up all of those parts. And when using a lighter gray or any kind of lighter color like this, you'll always want to thin it down a little bit extra. I know it's pretty much common knowledge in the hobby space now to use 2 to 3 thin coats of paint before you use them. Just don't use them, don't use them straight out of the bottle. But with these lighter colors like yellows and pinks and whites and light grays, they can really tend to come out a little bit chunky or chalky or obscure the model, obscure the detail of the model. So always be a little bit conscious of that and always thin them down just a tad more than you think you should. Keeping in with our Song of Ice and Fire speed paint theme here that we have on the channel, we're going to switch over to Gravelord Gray, and with this we're going to cover all of the bits of the undercloak that are poking through the model. There's a huge bit on his back poking through here, and a little bit underneath his face and chin around his clavicle area. So we'll want to go ahead and carefully cover that and be very careful around the metallics here. If you do, get any of the speed paint on your metallics, it's always good to have a damp brush nearby to just kind of wipe that off, and then a dry brush to wipe that off. It's always good to have those handy. It's a really nice tool if you hate making mistakes with your speed paints or your washes. And for these next couple of steps, we're going to skip the close-ups because they're all going to go by very quick, and we'll have a very nice close-up for you guys at the end. So after you get finished with the Gravelord Gray, we're going to switch over to Dark Wood, and with this we're going to cover all of the leather bits like the belt and the pouches here. So we're just going to cover all of these here. I'm using kind of a thinner version of this than I normally would, but you can go as thin or as thick as you would like. Just be very careful when you go around the belt, because it is right next to some nice metallic bits that we painted earlier. There's also a faint bit of a leather shirt poking out by the head of the model, so we'll go ahead and just very carefully cover that area as well. Moving on to the face here, we're going to switch over to Corpse Pale, and for this we're just going to dot the highlights on the face. This is just a normal acrylic, and the reason I like to do this is because it adds a little bit more depth and character to the face than it normally otherwise would if you were just to add it to the gray zenithal that we did earlier. So if you go back to the Umber Berserker video that I posted, I'll leave a link in the description of this video, you can kind of tell that it added a bit more realism and depth to the character. You'll only really need 1 to 2 thin coats of this. We don't really need a fully opaque color on it. You can just kind of get away with doing a couple of thin lines on it, and then we'll switch over to the speed paint here in a moment. And for our speed paint, we're going to switch over to Crusader Skin, and we are just going to dot the face here, and very carefully dot the chin all the way into the neck there. Moving on to our final step here, we're going to switch over to Grim Black, and we're going to simply cover the entirety of the hair of the model here. And feel free to kind of push this color into the recess areas that meet the leather part of the cloak. It just kind of adds a little bit extra detail and shadow. And once we got this step finished, all that's left to do on the model is varnish and base it in the style of the rest of your army. And if you don't know how to varnish your models or base your models, feel free to check out the miniature painting tutorials playlist that we have. It has a couple of great options for both of those. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what kind of content you guys want to see on the channel. I'd love to get some feedback on what you guys would like to see. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Be sure to check the top link in the description to take part in the giveaway below. And happy wargaming!